can you tell me what's the difference between the role that the women play in the literature about 10 years ago and the role now, at this moment? There must be a difference.
Well, I don't know that there's a difference that you can measure in decades, but there certainly is a difference you can measure in 30 or 40 or 50 years. I doubt very much if 30 years ago there were any feminist-owned, woman-owned publishing houses. On the other hand, there wasn't any need for them because no one knew that women were writing books that men would refuse to publish. I doubt very much if there was a lesbian publishing house, although there was a female-owned publishing house in Paris, the Shakespeare Company, which Sylvia Beach owned in the 20s, and they were lesbians, but they published mainly men. And I think that's how literature was seen. Literature was the male preserve. Men wrote literature. Women adored them, helped them, nourished them, and so forth. Of course, women have always written. And we are starting to acknowledge that now. I don't think that probably most people still will be willing to admit that women's literature is as important and as artistic as men's. But a lot of women may think so.
Yes. And do you think now, in this period, the women are as important as the men?
I think they're more important. I think that the important literature of a period comes from people who are hungry. I mean, in the deepest sense, hungry. I think in the United States, for instance, the most important new wave of literature is coming from black women. Because they need to express themselves. They're hungry for a voice. And they're producing wonderful, wonderful stuff. And I think what women are producing these days is very much alive and will help to point some kind of vision for us to live by in the future, a better way than we live now.
Yes. And for women like you and me, what's the most important thing that we have to fight for now at this moment?
Our fight is overwhelming because what we need to do is change the world, and I'm quite serious. We need to try to get a voice. The most important thing that governments should be concerned with, the central concern of any country that calls itself a state, should be its children. It's its most valuable resource, the most valuable, precious thing it creates. It's the only thing that nation cannot live without. A nation can live without roads or cars, but it cannot live without citizens. And the human race cannot continue without children. And yet, children are on the very bottom of the list in most national agendas, and trade and money and the power of the people in power and the greater power of the country itself, all of these things are far more important to governments than it's these children who should all be raised with enough food and education and in a safe place and in a beautiful place. It seems to me that's what women need to do. Now, how they go about doing that, how you get governments to listen, how you get the men who own these multinational corporations that really do run the world, it's not governments that run the world anymore, to listen to a thing like that, I really don't know. You try to get a voice. You try in any way you can.
Yes. And then about this bookstore here, fair here in Amsterdam now at this moment. You and your colleagues call it feministic.
Feminism, yes.
But don't you think that the reaction on that is something like, why feministic? Why a normal book fair for everybody? Why feministic in this time?
Well, precisely because feminist books don't get published by a lot of normal publishers. It's true that there are some commercial publishers with exhibits in the fair. My own publisher, Mullenhoff, produced a number of books by feminists. But there are hundreds of small presses in there that publish books by women who would never be heard if they didn't exist. This is not, you don't hold a separate book fair. You don't call yourself a separate label for fun. Nobody wants to be different from the mainstream. Nobody wants to be embattled. You do it because it's the only way you can be heard.
That's the reason.
Yes.
I have to look here. Yes. Do you think that also men will come here to see what the women write?
I was over there today, and there were a few men sprinkled around, and there were men in some of the booths. Men are doing some of the selling. There were a few men in the audience last night, but not a great many. I think men, especially older men, insist it doesn't matter what it costs them. Insist that they can learn nothing from women. You're welcome.